think it's that best way.
Either's fine. Frankly, you could sit in front of my computer and then people would get to see, more of your head.
But it's also these guys almost hit them.
They will get to see your head projected.
Oh, that's a good point.
Notice how everybody can see my head now. Anyway,
See that?
welcome to the Ballpark Community Council meeting for May 2026. It is a delight to host you all virtually and in person. And let's get started. What have we been up to this month? We have been envisioning the future of Liberty Park. I totally recommend checking out the vision plan. If you're already a fan of Liberty Park, you will like the plan. It's mostly about spiffing up what already exists. We've been getting the results of our CIP applications. I'm sorry to say that we did not rank. Let's see, let me share my screen.
Oh, hello, Rebollo.
Why, hello, Representative Grant Miller.
Listen, be here.
Mm-hmm.
Sneak in. Hey, good to see you, man. I remember you're a familiar face. Good to see you, man. I didn't know.
We had my fault, so I'm just thinking.
Sounds good. It's a cool thing. What do the cool kids do these days?
It's unclear what the cool kids do. Let's see. But what we do want to, although our CIP was not chosen for the mayor's support, we do want to say that our friends over in East Liberty Park and Sugar House and Liberty Wells did successfully get the support of both the CIP board and the mayor. So, we can expect some awesome byway crossings on 17th South in 5 to 6 years. If that's similar, maybe it'll be sooner than that, but that's about the speed of the Kensington Avenue byway. So get psyched. There were 5 constituent applications that were chosen for support. So it's pretty meaningful that one's going through. Hey, fire department. Hello. Right. Fire department, I don't want to waste your time at all. Would you like to jump in at this moment?
Sure.
Maybe even at the front of the room?
Beautiful evening tonight.
Sure
Thanks
is.
for being, I guess. I'm paramedic Lampy. Our crew is from Station 8. We're just down here at 1300 South Main Street. So this is part of our district that we respond to. So some of the things that we want to just kind of bring to everybody's attention as it's getting warmer weather, nicer weather. I'm sure everybody's seeing the kids out on the e-bikes, right? And you're hearing the news about some of the new regulations that are coming out. A couple of the different things that are important to take note of is there are a lot of accidents that happen. Kids tend to be a little fearless at times, and so we want to make sure that we're taking care of all of our kids out there that are riding these bikes. Being aware of traffic laws and make sure they're wearing helmets. Some of the different regulations that are coming up are they're classifying different types of bikes all the way up to electric motorcycles. So we want to make sure that we're following the laws and our kids aren't getting in trouble and having their bikes confiscated or anything like that because they're in violation, through some, that's just not knowing, being aware of what's going on. So a class 1 is going to be any type of bicycle or electric bicycle that'll go up to 20 miles an hour with pedaling. So they have to have assistance of pedaling. A class 2 would be up to 20 without pedaling. And then a class 3 is going to be up to 28 without pedaling. And so those are, it's high risk, higher risk, and then highest risk. Any bike that goes over 20 though, without any pedaling at all, is just considered to be an electric motorcycle. That you have to have a license for that, and you have to have a DOT registered helmet. So it is important. So they do, I know in my neighborhood, we'll come out and they're going by 30 miles an hour, riding wheelies, no helmets. And it's like, oh man, it's job security, I suppose, but I definitely don't want that. We hate responding out on kids, but so those are some.
Go ahead. Place to be really, really cognizant of how fast e-bikes can go. If you're like, you happen to be in a car and you're turning onto, if you're crossing the 9 line.
Yeah.
like you have to look both ways and look both ways again, and you can still be pretty
Yeah.
surprised.
Yeah, that's kind of my next point was that they do have to follow all the traffic laws. All cyclists have to follow traffic laws. I know a lot of cyclists don't. So they just think, oh, they can just fly right through that intersection because I'm on a bike. Well, you might get away with that most of the time, but there's the times that we see that somebody doesn't get away with it and they get blasted by a car or a truck and can be even fatal if they're hit fast enough. And yeah, those kids coming through, if they're going super fast, or adults for that matter, if they're going super fast and blazing up to an intersection and not really looking, and you don't realize just how fast they are going if they're not wearing bright clothing or they're just not able to be seen, then that's when, unfortunately, we have to respond to a lot of those things. So some important things that we want to just keep in mind and make sure that we're talking to our kids about. No kids under 8 are allowed. The state's not going to allow anybody under 8 on an e-bike. It's just the dangers are just too great. 8 to 15, they want to make sure that they have parental supervision or they've been to a safety course so that they know what they're doing. And then, like I mentioned, those class 3 and above bikes that are considered to be motorcycles, they need to get, or well, not class 3, but the one above class 3, they want to make sure that they have a license for it. And all of them should be wearing helmets, even on just pedal bikes. It's super important to do that just for safety purposes. Another thing that's super important with these e-bikes is the batteries, right? I mean, we see horror stories of batteries self-igniting and exploding in people's houses. One of the things that we can recommend as a fire department is if you do have an e-bike or any type of lithium ion battery, make sure that if you ever have to replace the battery, that you go with the original equipment manufacturer's battery. Refurbished batteries are absolute no-no, because the cells that are inside those, they test each one of the cells and they'll only replace the cells that are under a certain percentage of threshold of being able to produce power. So if they're 5 or 6 years old, but they just cleared that threshold, they won't replace that particular cell, which means it's going to deteriorate faster. And that's what eventually causes these batteries to self-ignite. They produce more and more heat and then they self-combust and sometimes explode and can have some pretty significant problems with that. But if you have any kids or know any kids that are riding these bikes, just try to emphasize to them, got to obey those laws, because people just don't always see them. Even like on regular full-size motorcycles, which I do ride, people don't always see me. And I'm on a big bike. It's a 1200cc bike and it's got the boxes, it's big, and I still have people just come up to an intersection, look, and then just pull right out in front of me. So it's important that we emphasize the safety with these kids and make sure that they're wearing the helmets, wearing brightly colored vests, which I know is not cool, but it is important out there. So those are just some main things. The obvious stuff in the summertime, just we're getting out, just try to be safe, be careful with what you're doing, and just emphasize those safety rules with the kids if you can. So any questions on any of that?
Do you think we're going to have firework restrictions come on earlier this year?
I would imagine so. Just based on, it kind of depends on weather. Obviously, if we're getting a ton of rain all of a sudden, then maybe they'll relax that a little bit. But as things have gone, it's just getting warmer and drier, and which means our fire seasons are getting longer and longer. We are taking some precautions with the fire department to expand our wildland capabilities. We're bringing in new equipment. We're getting new certifications with wildland certifications, and so we're trying to make sure that hopefully trying to stay ahead of the big fires that could pop up, but you never know. That's why it's called an emergency, because it just kind of sneaks up on you sometimes. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, my question was just about the little mini bikes.
Yes.
I live right by East High School and we see a lot of, people just playing around on those mini bikes. And are those would be type 3?
So the real little ones?
The real little ones that don't seem to have any pedals.
Yeah.
Go really fast.
It's all based on speed.
Uh-huh.
So it doesn't matter how big they are necessarily. If they can get up to 20 miles an hour or over without being pedaled, then it would be that class 3. If it's below that and they do have pedals, then it would be class 1 or 2, depending on just how fast they can actually go. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Question about the lithium ion battery. What types of batteries are causing fires or the problem? And is the problem from leaving them continuously charging, or what's creating the problem?
That is one problem that consists with that, but all batteries degrade over time. And so the older they get, the higher the risk is there. It depends on the manufacturer as to when they recommend replacing those batteries. But the things that we're seeing in the fire industry is that if you do need to replace it, it is more expensive, unfortunately. And so a lot of people do go with refurbished batteries. But the risk level is so high with that, it's just not worth it to, risk burning your house down or have a fatality or
And
something.
does that include small ones like for your trimmer and leaf blower kind
Yeah,
of
pretty
small
much.
ones?
Yeah,
All
like
on up to
yeah. So I have like electric battery powered like leaf blowers at my house. Once they're charged up, I unplug it. So because even if it doesn't catch fire, it does. Well, if you just leave it plugged in 24/7, the battery will degrade a lot faster, which increases the risk, obviously. So, and I just don't like buying new batteries because they're quite expensive. So, anyone else?
We appreciate your service.
No, well, thank you. Appreciate it. Glad we can come out. So that's kind of the main thing that we're focused on this summer. And then obviously, gearing up for wildland and making sure that we're prepared for all that. But here in the city, we're not in, downtown area. It's not as big of a concern as it is up on the bench and around that area. But you might see us out there training and some new equipment around the city here and there. So, okay. All right. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Clean your lens here. Maybe that will be effective. You'll be able to focus on your visuals again. Maybe not. All righty. Andrew, you're the star of this show. I would love it.
Okay,
You would introduce yourself and
sure.
tell us who you are, and maybe a cleaned off lens. will
Yeah,
help
do you want
us.
to put it up on the screen after I'm controlling the investment?
Would you, the ordinance itself?
Yeah, after we talk for a second, I guess.
Okay, either one's, if you want, you could have it like right behind you.
Okay.
I can pull up the staff report and share it that way. Would you like that?
Well, while you're doing that, Andrew Johnston, I'm in the mayor's office. I'm advisor on homelessness, director of homelessness policy and outreach. We're talking tonight about a proposal to the city council to amend the no camping ordinance in the city. It's got a slightly different name in the actual ordinance, but that's what it is. We've been talking about this and working on it for several years now, and even in the time we've been working on it, the landscape has shifted dramatically from what it was 2 to 3 years ago on the streets and the parks, foothills, et cetera. And the legal landscape has actually shifted as well to some extent. During this time, we've had a couple of rulings come down, one of which was Grants Pass in Oregon, which shifted a lot of what we've been talking about for years. And so we had a lot of things happening as we were talking through this. The ordinance itself, I can't tell you how long our current ordinance has been around, but we have had at least some version of a camping ordinance since the 1960s. The language in ours tells me that it probably had a lot of elements from that early version because it reads a little bit like they were thinking more about Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts camping than people living in vehicles or in parks full time. And so it really didn't match up with our current situation in this city and this county. We also know that the cities around us have been actively enforcing more strict ordinances in this area for a number of years than we have. Whether it's on their books or they're just policies and how they're enforcing, we felt the effects from having folks be directed in their vehicles to move to 17 South and Redwood Road in our city from other cities because they were told that's where you can legally park your vehicle and live in it, to city employees from other cities literally dropping people off in our city, sometimes around resource centers, sometimes around just parking strips. Around the corner from me on 8th West, I saw this happen one night. A police officer from another jurisdiction literally dropped somebody off to set up the game and they drove away. So we're not talking about us being in a silo. We have to talk about this in the context of a larger kind of area. There's a few things in this, the ordinance has a lot of stuff in it, and so it gets a little difficult to talk through sometimes. But what you have up on the screen right now is the city council staff report. So when we submit our proposal to them, their staff goes through and analyzes it and puts it into a readable form for the council members, which is helpful for us as well. The starting point is it does a few our draft would do a couple of things. One of which is we expand the definition of what camping is in the city. Currently, the definition really centers around setting up a structure of some sort to sleep in or stay in. That doesn't mean necessarily just a tent, it could be a lean-to, it could be something with tarps, it could be naturally stuff, vegetation, whatever it is, but you're forming something to stay in, and that's what a camp is. We don't see a lot of that right now in city limits, except for the Jordan River, perhaps in the foothills, at least this week. But it was really restrictive, and so from a police perspective, and I think we've got Sergeant Fallows on tonight too. It was difficult for the police officers who were called out sometimes to figure out, am I within the limits of what our ordinance says or not? If I were to say this is camping, I'm going to enforce on this. So there was some difficulty there. In our proposal, it also expands it to include vehicles. Currently, we don't have anything in our city ordinances that prohibits somebody from living in a vehicle. What we have is a parking restriction that you cannot stay in a block face for more than 48 hours. Once you're notified that you're there, you have to move within that time frame. But that means you can move around the block indefinitely, essentially. And as long as you're not violating county health department statutes, you're not in violation of anything. And it's been very difficult as we've seen that number of vehicles increase over time, and increasingly, understandably, moving to less populated areas like the industrial area on the west side and places like that. Unless there was other things happening there, nuisance issues sometimes, or county health department, we get involved a lot and declare this is a health issue. You need to deal with it, Public City. We didn't have a legal framework to address that. A couple other things that also talks through some of the things about where you can camp and where you can't camp. And what I mean by that is you can't camp, but there are places where the mayor has some discretion based on emergency declarations or things like that to allow it. We also in there said, even if there's an emergency or the mayor wants to allow something, you can't do it in front of certain things like entrances and exits from, there we go. Certain facilities like shelters, supportive housing, hospitals, etc., within 500 feet of daycares, senior centers, schools, driveways, and the riparian corridor area, which is really a zoning issue that focuses on places that are more open space. And then also there's an immediate threat or risk to persons, public safety, or vital government services. So this would be new as well, we see on the screen. In effect, in the past, when we address camps in the city, and this is going back probably 4 or 5 years at least now, we actually would prioritize enforcement of the no camping ordinance around places like this anyway as policy. Because we had to start someplace because we couldn't get everywhere at the same time, and these are the highest priority. So this would put into the statute what we've been doing in policy-wise for a while. That's the biggest stuff I think right now. Now, the other thing you'll see is it prohibits camping except for the top 3 things there where a property owner authorizes it, and there are still some restrictions in that separate from this. Along a parade route, which was something that people brought up, that the Days of 47 parade or other parades people would camp out for, people didn't feel comfortable saying no to all of that. But it does put a tricky sort of balance there, as you can imagine now. And then if the mayor declares an emergency, those are the times when it could be allowed under this proposal.
Did anyone bring up, like, and maybe this is the University of Utah is a separate planet that somehow also exists in our city, but folks who camp out for like sporting events?
Yeah, the University of Utah is a separate planet,
Okay,
under their own discretion and rules, evidently.
just checking.
If the legislature tells you otherwise, then I go with that. So yeah, the University of Utah is separate. State facilities are separate as well. Obviously, they don't follow the city rules in a lot of ways. So it wouldn't apply to those places, you might understand. I will also say that this is legal ordinance work, right? It doesn't address then what do you do? It says you can't do these things, but it doesn't say if you don't have a place to live, where do you go? And that's one of the dilemmas in doing this. I won't say that we held back on this for a couple of years, but we've also been working heavily on the side of service delivery in the meantime while we've been working on this to say it's hard just to say no to everything when we know there is a need out there. And with the city council meeting this week, I heard a lot of people talk about there is a need. And there is a need for folks to have a place to go. We just don't have some resources, but we don't address that in this necessarily. when I talked to the city council, I tried to make a priority of saying we have to do both. But in this document, you've got to lay out a framework and then you got to deliver the services as well. And so some of the things we have been doing is Salt Lake City currently does host the majority of the shelter beds in this county. Particularly the winter beds. We have, as a system, not just a city, added 600 winter shelter beds over the last couple of years. And we've actually kept most, if not all of them, year round by some magic of financing we figured out. They are temporary, but those are beds we didn't have 6 years ago. And so that's had a dramatic impact on our city streets because there's more places for people to be into, and they're generally pretty full. Our core shelter beds year round have run at 96 to 97% capacity for several years now. They are functionally full as well. So that's been happening, trying to deliver services. We've also continued to do things like a place for your stuff, Dave's Place down on 5th West, which is a free storage facility for folks who are unhoused to store their things safely. And they can come and retrieve it during hours when it's open and give and take stuff inside of there. Well, we've also been adding their outreach team we fund through Volunteers of America, Utah. We've done a number of things on this end of service delivery ways to try and help. We've also added with the police department some ability to get immediate access to detox beds at VOA Detox on Rebollo Road, and also immediate access to beds at St. Vincent de Paul downtown every day. So the police department doesn't have to wait in line for those things. They can actually get people in if they come across them and say, I can get you into a place today or tonight if you want to. We've tried to make sure that's part of their policy. And they have that now across the police department. On the bigger picture, I always talk about that homelessness is really related directly to housing affordability or general affordability, shelter availability, and services, those three things. We currently in this city host over 60% of the permanent supportive housing units in the entire state. We are about 6 to 7% of the population of the state. We host 60% of those beds. We have done tens of millions of dollars in this administration's term to have affordable housing, and this year alone we have $5 million set aside for deeply affordable housing. We are doing a ton of work, and we can't do it alone. Otherwise, we would have solved this with just our money. But we're trying very, very hard from the city and to make sure we are living up to the service side, even if we have to have enforcement of these things. Does that make sense? Okay. The other piece in here is we don't address policy. So this is city ordinance, and the city council has to change it. Department policy, like the police department or parks department policy, can't be changed administratively anytime we need to. So a lot of the things, feedback we're getting, and a lot of things we want to do for service delivery and our enforcement mechanisms, and when do we enforce, when do we prioritize enforcement in different ways, would be within a department policy piece. And Chief Red and I have talked multiple times this week and over the months now about his determination. He doesn't want his department just to enforce with no thought. They understand very clearly there's a wide variety of situations, both the people that they're coming across and the environmental situations, that could change how they enforce this and what they offer and how they do things. So we do want that in place, and my imagination would say that the city council in our discussions in the next few weeks are going to want to see more of that with this ordinance as well, balancing it. Okay. Now, moving down a little bit here, some of the rest of it talks about stuff people come across. The police department, when the police department comes across a camp and they need to say you can't camp here or nobody's there, the police department does not pick up trash, does not pick up personal items, do not pick up things there. That's not what they do. If, this is actually really rare in our city these days, if they do cite somebody for camping or arrest them for camping, generally they're actually arresting for something else when they pull up the name in the database, like a warrant or something. I'm not going into if that's sort of the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, it's what they do. But if they do arrest somebody for a violation, they have to take things into evidence. And that means if it's a camping violation, they got to take the camp into evidence. Functionally, that doesn't work for the police department very well. It takes them so long sometimes to do that it doesn't help them in any way, and us generally speaking. There's actually numerous instances over the last couple of years where an officer would do that and take the stuff into evidence. And so what they got to do is they got to transport the person to the county jail, do the paperwork at the jail, take the evidence to the evidence facility in the Western Industrial Area. And before they even leave the evidence facility, the person's been discharged from the jail. It's just a circular thing. So functionally speaking, enforcement's been really, really hard. And it doesn't, nobody wants to arrest somebody for camping because it doesn't help either side of this equation, right? So when we do have to remove stuff from an encampment, there are times when somebody's there and we want them to have reasonable time to pack up their stuff and comply with the ordinance, which means they usually put it into whatever carts they've got and they'll take it with them. And you'll see a lot of that these days around the city where there's not a lot of camping during the daytime anywhere in particular in the city, at least populated parts of the city. At night, people are camping down at places. They're usually a little more out of sight or in the foothills again, the river. So people are complying with that piece of the ordinance already. It doesn't answer the question of where they're gonna go, again, but they are doing that. If there's stuff left behind, there's been a lot of questions about how do you know if it's trash? How do you know if it's really important, sensitive personal belongings? And that's hard. Now, there are times when I see Dennis Ferris here, who's done some work with outreach teams before. And you'll sort of know when you're there if this has been used recently or not. And a lot of times it hasn't been. And so that's what some of this dictates as far as if it's there's a whole list of sort of provisions about trash or left behind items or things like that. It outlines how you handle that, and they can't handle that immediately. Instead of saying, I've identified this location with stuff that is here, but I've got to wait a certain piece of time before I can address it. From the county health department perspective, that's very difficult. And leaving it there is difficult because it could be a health violation. And we've had problems with rats, for instance, and other things that have come if you leave things in place. So we needed a mechanism where it's discarded, if it's trash, or is a health violation, but we can take it immediately if needs be. Years ago, when we were doing a lot of big encampments in the city, there'd be a lot of tents, for instance, and people's stuff in there. Our outreach teams did not want to go in the tents, and our cleanup crews did not want to go in the tents because there's a high probability of injury for someone, usually from sharps. If you're going through somebody's bag or a sleeping bag that's rolled up or a pile of stuff, that doesn't work well to go through someone's property because it's a risk for everybody, right? So what they've really tried to do is make sure people understand, pack your things up and move, take it with you what you want. And if it's left behind, then we do have to dispose of it. So that's what a lot of this does. And then it talks about some personal property that we take into place and then abandoned property as mentioned a minute ago. And there's not a fine line there about exactly how you handle that, but from the police perspective, they don't take the stuff. Our cleaning crews will go out and they do have to clean up. And this sort of addresses some of that piece. Are there questions about that? Okay. From a policy perspective, we've always tried to use outreach teams as much as possible and police social workers in advance. There's a question about notification as well. Currently, as I understand it, there is no requirement for advance notice of camp violation cleanup activities. The health department for a number of years has had their own policy of trying to do 24 to 48 hour notice when they're doing a large cleanup. And generally the larger ones are initiated by the health department and we execute it from the city. Our city staff and resources go and do it with them. Now there's no requirement, they tell us to do that, but they thought it was best practices and I agree with it is best practice. It's best practice when you have a place where you can do that. So if somebody set up a camp, a defined location, and you can go out and talk to them or post a sign there that says on this day we're going to do this, that's good. If no one's there, trying that multiple times is better. We try that as well. And oftentimes when we did the big cleanup several years ago, like on 5th West, we'd have folks go out. If it was supposed to start at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday, whatever it was, our police or other folks would go out at like 6 a.m. and at least try and again notify folks who weren't there or they didn't see the sign, or generally what happens, the sign would evaporate immediately from the posts as soon as they put up, and try and advance notice as much as possible in the situations. We've also written in that if there's posted signage that says you can't camp here, that's notification as well, to help some consistent areas and where we can't get to every place at the same time. So that's also notification, but it says reasonable notice, and that's pretty vague in there, partially because we need that flexibility depending on the situation. One example is wintertime when the weather's bad and it doesn't make any sense to move somebody out of an entrenched camp with protection from the elements. And we know there's probably not a lot of options inside. police have the option to not necessarily enforce at that time. Reasonable time in that case would be much longer potentially. It also identifies in our proposal that we can't violate the code blue state statute. So when it's below 15 degrees Fahrenheit, the state does not allow us to remove personal property from an encampment that we don't enforce. And so we make sure we comply with that as well. And we do want the police department to have that discretion to not enforce in times when it would be detrimental to somebody's health, based on the circumstances as well. Okay. Obstructing thoroughfares. Another big piece in our current sort of gap in our ordinance is what do you do with park strips? Between sidewalks and gutters, right? They're a bane, as a city council member, for me, it was a bane to my existence. It's a bane as a property owner in the city to my existence. I wish we had a better way to handle those things in the city for a lot of reasons, but we don't. So it's sort of your responsibility as a property owner, but not fully because you can't do whatever you want on that strip, right? In our city, it's been a really gray area about what do you do with that. We know in our parks, there's certain curfews, you can't camp there, stay there overnight. We knew if you're on a sidewalk or a street, you don't want you there very long, but those park strips were not identified very well. And in two parts of our code, it says two different things right now. Today, you have 5 minutes to vacate a camp once you are notified of that. And you have in a separate place, 2 minutes to stop obstructing a public right of way, usually a sidewalk or a street. Okay. Now, from the police perspective, they didn't know sometimes it overlapped. And sometimes they got frustrated because they get identified and the clock starts and then we stand there with them and they stand there. And it was hard for them. And then I think there's a third part someplace else that said just reasonable notice, that language again. So in here, there's not a magic time frame for everything we're talking about. So the proposal right now is 2 minutes to not obstruct a thoroughfare or clean up once you are notified. Now, that makes more sense for a sidewalk, for instance, than it does for the foothill above Victory Road. We don't expect that somebody with a large camp is going to clean up in 2 minutes. We need reasonable notice there and a reasonable time frame. That's going to be a policy thing as well. And I think we'll probably have more discussions with City Council in the next couple of weeks about maybe clarifying that piece for everybody. From a police enforcement, Sergeant, you can correct me if you're on here. It helps them to have a more unified way to look at this. 2 minutes plus reasonable sort of notice based on the situation across the board. I can see that being changed. We'll see how that goes. But it makes sense if somebody is sitting sleeping across the sidewalk or blocking a park strip between a parking space and a sidewalk or a house or a residence. That's where that comes into better play. And also into play when somebody's blocking an entrance to a building or those kind of places like that, where we just don't want to wait 5, 10, 20 minutes necessarily. Or if they're in the middle of the street, that's a public safety issue as well. So that's where it comes out of that thing. I think that might change, we guess, before it gets enacted, perhaps, if it does. Any questions on that piece?
Yes, if somebody, so right now, as I understand it, if somebody wanted to set up a sort of a little vending tent on the parking strip of residential property, not their own, there's really not anything anyone can do about that, right?
It's a gray area as far as the ordinance about use of that particular space. Now, if they're selling something, there could be other ordinances.
Right,
Stuff.
but I mean, just the use of using the
Using
space.
it is tricky, yes.
Will this make it so that,
What we have done, I'll say maybe even currently, is we have large park strips between a sidewalk and a track station area, for instance, like Courthouse Station. And places like that where they've been interpreted as blocking a public right of way between the sidewalk and a track station or something similar. And so we've enforced on those parking strips. If it's in front of a private residence and somebody sort of complains, we could enforce there technically, but it's tricky. Again, this is where it's tough right now because there's not a clear saying yes or no on these things sometimes.
so I mean, we have families who live on 800 West, just a little bit north of North Temple, and people come and hang out on their parking strips, and the police have always pretty much told them that there's really not much they can do about that. But it sounds like this would allow the police to say you can only stay here You have to vacate within 2 minutes.
And
Is
it's
that
not-
right? Or-
Yes, under this proposal, it would be a 2 minute sort of clock essentially to vacate. Now, it also depends on where you're talking about. So 800 West, for instance, the big medians, grass medians, those were never zoned as open space. Those are still part of the street. So technically, it's part of the street, therefore you can't be on those and obstruct them in any way, even though it really isn't drivable. So there's all those kind of things across the city as well that complicate it, where you're at.
Do they have scripts for talking to people, like things they memorize? Like, I know they have like Miranda rights or whatever, but do they have one like the clock starts now or anything like that?
Not yet. That'd be a part of, I think, a policy internally with the police department about, in these situations, this is how we would recommend you approach this. The other thing I'll say, this is a good entry point actually, is our intent is not to make this the point. Our point is we need something that's consistent across the city to enforce with resources to try and make it possible to adhere to that. One of the things we do want to do is make sure that all the police officers have an up-to-date list of all the resources available, both the ones they have direct access to, like the detox or the shelter beds, but also anything else. And that would align with a new state law that says they want first responders to have mental health crisis services available. So we'd want that with all the officers and first responders as well for that purpose, I think. So I think we want to make sure that they're enforcing with all the resources we can to make it possible to sort of adhere to this. Now, the piece we haven't talked about now, which is another segue, is into occupied vehicles. We've done a pretty good job over time, last few years, adding more shelter beds. It's been rough and hard to do that, but we've done it. And we can feel a positive impact by that. What we haven't had is a resource that applies to people in vehicles. When I say that, I mean, we may think of somebody living in their vehicle as experiencing homelessness. Generally speaking, when you talk to folks who are living in a vehicle, they don't feel like they are homeless. They don't think they need a shelter or a resource like that. This is their home. So they don't really take resources when it's offered to them, and they don't go to those resources, generally speaking. But they're still sort of living and needing some resources that would equate to being homeless, I guess, put it that way. And it's been really tricky for us to address that. And we don't have anything set up that would address a vehicle. Where do you go with your personal property vehicle to sort of stay safely and legally for a long period of time? 2 years ago, when we had a proposal in front of the owner of the former Ramada on North Temple, which has been demolished since then. But that was going to be turned into 200 units of deeply affordable housing. We also had an agreement with them to set up 10 parking spaces in their large parking lot that would be set aside for recreational vehicles or occupied vehicles. So folks could actually park there legally long-term and get the resources of that development with the goal of getting them into an apartment or housing out of their vehicle long-term. Unfortunately, that whole project fell apart. It got bought out by another entity who demolished it. But in our talks with the state about the proposed campus, they've talked about for a couple of years now, the big one. We've also been very clear, we needed this group of people in vehicles to be addressed there. That needs to happen somehow. That's not necessarily moving forward very quickly at this point, that whole campus. It's still to be determined. But we are in active discussions with the state and the county about, we have this whole group of folks that's, I'll say we may anecdotally have a number of people living in vehicles that's approaching the number of people actually camping. It's getting that big a number. And we need to figure out what do we do with folks there who don't feel like they're homeless but have no place to be in their vehicle. One of the contentious pieces in the city council meeting this week was about that particular provision where it would outlaw people living in a vehicle because it would be camping. And therefore, a police officer who came across somebody living in a vehicle, an recreational vehicle or other vehicle, could actually say, you are violating the camping ordinance in our city street. You can't do that here in the city. It doesn't tell them where they can do it or where they can't go. And so there's a big dilemma there. Now, the consequence for violating our current statute for violating the camping ordinance is generally a Class B misdemeanor, I believe. It's still a Class B misdemeanor. Sometimes it involves a fine. Sometimes it involves a requirement to present in front of the judge. Sometimes it's both. We haven't suggested changing that in this new ordinance. So if you're in a vehicle violating the camping ordinance in the new version, and the police officer told you you were and you didn't comply with that for whatever reason, whether your vehicle didn't work or you just chose not to, it's a citation, it's not necessarily an arrestable citation. This is where it gets to that camping discussion again about enforcement. To remove somebody from a vehicle is tough and hard. You have to tow the vehicle, and we don't tow ourselves, we have a third-party towing company that does that, and they get paid for that by us. And generally, they store it in their yard until somebody pays to get it out, that's how they make their money back. Nobody ever pays to get these out of storage. In our experience in several years now, no one ever goes in to get their RV out of storage because they can't afford it. And they can't prove it's theirs because it probably wasn't registered. It's really difficult. And so the towing companies don't want to do this actually. And when they have done it, there are instances where they've literally turned around and resold it on social media sites for very cheap, and it ends up back in the street again. It's just a bad circular pattern for us. So even if you want to just take the vehicle away and say we're done with it, it doesn't work. It's expensive, it doesn't actually get destroyed, and somebody may end up just being physically homeless about it. So you can see our dilemma about having an ordinance, and we need the ordinance to make sure we're clear with everybody that this is not a safe place just to set up shop with vehicles. But we also need to figure out, what do you do instead? Because we can't just take them away forever and it's not going to solve it. So that's why we need all the resources still. But that is a part of this that would make it illegal to live in your vehicle in city property, in city streets, public rights of way. Questions on that piece? Two here, okay. Go to the first.
My question is, so I went to the Central City Neighborhood Council meeting, Clancy was there, he was talking about this gonna come online, and then magically it came online. So what led up to this being put out so quickly just over the last couple months, even though we've been working on it for so long?
But
This version of the ordinance.
I wouldn't say it's been quick in any way.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We've been working on it for years, but then all of a sudden it really came on fast. Was there something that changed that?
No, I mean, we've had versions of this for months and months and months, and we looked last fall about doing it, and we had some more discussions with other stakeholders about it. We looked about a year ago, and Grants Pass was about to come out, so we waited on that at that point. The city council they have a time frame as well. So the legislative session sort of got in the way as well. I mean, there's a lot of things that happened, so we put it out, but we could have put versions out a long time ago in different ways. So it feels like it's kind of abrupt, but we actually put it in city council, and then they have their whole budget thing going on now, so they're probably delay as well. And so the timing, it feels that way, but it's probably not true.
That's what I was wondering. But a lot of people have asked that, and I just.
There's not a particular impetus here. I think last year when the legislature requested a response from the city about how you're going to make it more safe, and we put this public safety plan out.
Right.
We did include this in the public safety plan, bringing that forward. And it still took us a year to do it because we made sure we go through it again and again. So it does feel quick, but it's not necessarily quick.
Great, thank you.
My question was pretty related to Christina's because so many of these changes are this is a comprehensive set of changes. Would you anticipate that some of these changes may pass in this time and some are going to continue to be revised? Is that an option?
The city council can do whatever they want with it. So yes, it is an option. They could take pieces of it, they could not take other pieces of it, they could change pieces of it as they see fit.
Right.
So yeah, everything's on the table for them. We've gotten various amounts of feedback. I think one of the things that's been brought up is from an enforcement perspective, how does a police officer differentiate between somebody who's not causing a problem in a vehicle, say they're working, they're not causing trash everywhere, they're not putting fluids on the ground in the public right of way, they're not attracting drug dealers, all that sort of thing, versus somebody who is attracting other nuisance issues around. How do you enforce those differently? That's a good question. And I think that's something where Chief and I have talked a lot, and he doesn't want to equate those the same. But he also has a dilemma of how do you have an ordinance that is you apply differently in different situations without having running afoul of fair sort of enforcement, right? It's a really tricky thing. And sometimes people say, well, take it on a one-by-one basis where an officer can make the discretionary call on this. But it could open up other issues about, is the officer then liable for how they did it, not the department, the city? Is it fair based on where you are in the city? Would you be enforced harder in certain neighborhoods than other neighborhoods because they'll call more often in one neighborhood than another neighborhood? We are on a complaint-based city in a lot of ways, unfortunately, we're getting better in some ways, but oftentimes this is because somebody reports a problem, they don't like a vehicle out in front of their property, and so they want us to go and deal with it. But if people aren't reporting it, we may not know about it either. So there's all that involved. So I've come from a place of saying, from an ordinance perspective, the statute, it's gonna have to be pretty consistent. And there are parts in there that need to be some flexibility, like the term reasonable notice, for instance, and those get, or may, those kind of terms are up to. Make sure there's some discretion built in there if we need it, but not so much that it's completely discretionary. And you need the services. You need to be doing everything possible to make it possible to adhere to this. If you have no place to live and your vehicle is the only thing, if all we're saying is no, you can't comply, right? It's just impossible to follow the law. And that's not a dilemma we're gonna necessarily solve immediately, but we gotta work towards that. We gotta have both those things, because it's not really fair to say, based on maybe not a fault of your own right now, but situationally, you can't find a place to be. And just your persona non grata around here. So I don't have a good answer yet to that, other than we're gotta work on all the resources, we gotta get the officers alternatives and divert. And we're working with the county on all their efforts to divert people out of the criminal justice system as a whole, which is a huge piece of this. We want, I think the county agrees with it, I think the state agrees with this based on their funding from the legislative session this time, that they do want people diverted out of the criminal justice system as much as possible into the appropriate resources that we can give. That's mostly a county responsibility. But from a city side, we can also do what we can to help with that. So that's our goal in this, and it's gonna be an iterative thing as we go forward on it and trying to figure out problems that we come across, and then rally third-party support and money, try some pilots out, see what we can do with this.
I don't want to hog all the questions, but so I live on a street on the east side that's very dark and quiet. So a lot of folks will roll up and sleep at night in their car. You know, we don't get people pet pigeon tents or whatever. Sometimes we'll get a long stay RV, but nothing that equates to a problem in my mind or for any of my neighbors. So I recently went to the airport and I'm sitting in the lot, the long stay lot, where you're sitting there camping. And I was thinking, from the city council meeting, there were so many folks that were employed and essentially they sleep in their cars, I've slept in my car often. So have we ever thought about piloting a program for folks that just, are not actually living in their vehicles intensely, but just where they can roll up like a semi lot and sleep overnight and then, go to work the next morning? Have we ever thought about something really low intensity like that?
Yeah. So I think some good examples are out of places in California. And California's got a whole different sort of volume of this issue there, but they've opened up a few parking lots overnight where people could safely park there, and then they have to vacate in the morning.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how they've handled it in some places. There have been a few pilots about how do you do a longer term version of that where you could stay 24/7 over time. The one I saw that's probably the most effective was out of Oregon, where they had wildfire issues and they turned a county campground into a safe parking place for folks because they already had utility hookups for RVs, for instance. You haven't seen a lot of good examples of that elsewhere. The Salt Lake Valley Coalition and Homelessness actually looked at something, a sanctuary camp concept that would sort of be similar to what you talked about with vehicles, in the sense that you could bring your own stuff in. It's not a whole building, but you can stay there longer term. The reality also is it's still very expensive. To do it well, you need to have a defined perimeter for what you're going to do. So if you have a parking lot, say 50 stalls in there, you can't just leave it open so that people sort of come and go in there and out. And you can't have it in a space that's sort of an overflow where there's a core group that have, these are the rules we're going to follow over here, and then you have people who don't want to follow but go out just in periphery.
Mhm.
That's what some of the camping issues we had in the past.
Mhm.
So you need a defined perimeter, usually fenced or sort of cordoned off. You generally need a professional staff of some sort who's gonna monitor it 24/7. You probably need hookups of some sort, electrical, other things, for charging things or for disposing, at least bathroom sort of facilities on site, minimal, those kind of things. And so the cost sort of escalates pretty quickly, so it's not usually really cheap to do it. I'm not opposed to a pilot of that sort, and the biggest issue we've got is you gotta find land to do it, a third party to run it, or somebody to run it, and the funding. So getting one-time funding is fairly easy, but then the expectation oftentimes is, here's some seed money, and then figure out how to keep it going. If it costs $450,000 a year to run it every year, it's hard to continue that. So that's usually one of the dilemmas, and to be blunt with everybody, we've been scrambling just to try and keep the existing shelters open for another 2 months. That's been sort of very difficult, let alone finding a new program to go out there. So, yes, talking about it. Yes, we approached partners about this. I'm still optimistic that we'll maybe try something at some point, but it's not imminent, I'll say that. Other thing you gotta make sure you're clear about is, say the city took this on and we're the only one in the county. We're gonna be the sort of attracting point, right? Now, I'm not opposed to that in general because doing the right thing should be done for the right reasons, right? If it's the right thing to do, we need to do service to it. But if we don't have buy-in from multiple entities, it does tend to be the same problem we have for years and years where then cities will come across somebody staying in an RV and say, you know who allows this? Salt Lake. And maybe we do have a program here, but maybe it's full. That's probably have for shelters actually is you can go to Salt Lake and get shelter support, but if we're full, people are still dropping people off because they don't have anything in their town for this. So it's understandable. So that's a dilemma about a system sort of approach to this. I'm not opposed to it. I think we're still talking about it, but we need sort of a broader sort of coalition on this to figure it out.
Will there, on the face of this, I understand the need, I understand the pushback, I've been there both sides. On the face of this, it looks good, and you're mentioning conversations with Chief Red, and he's been amazing. Are there going to be guardrails, parameters that are built into this, so that if we get somebody else that is a hardcore, I hate homeless people, we don't see unintended consequences in 10 years or 5 years?
That's the difficulty of this, because the ordinance would require city council to change it, so you usually try and put an ordinance, something that's not something you want to revisit a lot. So sort of a bear sort of thing. That's where the policy makes sense, but to your point, if a current chief or a future chief wanted to change policy and maybe whoever the mayor is at the time was okay with that, they could change a policy that would be something about offering services or allowing some flexibility based on environmental factors, those kind of things.
Or
could
if we
change.
get somebody that's hardcore about enforcement.
The
Then
flip
what does
side,
that look like?
the flip side is if we didn't say we didn't have anything in our policies and we did this, then this is it, right? Like, it's just, no, can't do it, period. There's nothing else, no more discussion to this. Just no. So I don't know how we're gonna sort of fall on that with the city council. I think there are probably some city councilors who would like to see something in here that's a little more flexible perhaps, or identifies that. We're having discussions with them coming up there pretty quick. So I don't know how that's gonna come out. There is a balance somewhere there and I can't tell you where it's gonna fall. And I think you need both. And to be clear with everybody, today it is illegal to camp in the city. It still is. That hasn't changed. It's still a misdemeanor to do that. The other thing I didn't mention earlier was in some instances, it makes a lot of sense to have a requirement to show in front of a judge if you violate the ordinance. And the reason I say that in our city is because we have a justice court that handles multiple misdemeanor work here. And our justice court for a number of years has had a homeless court. We have a Familiar Faces program in that court right now. Our current judges and our administration have been very clear that they want alternatives out of that court instead of just fines and incarceration. So one of the positives is if you do have a violation for a camper related situation, you go in front of the homeless court, they can waive fines. They can waive jail time. They can change things to make it so you can get this off your record. They actually go out to the resource centers and homeless fairs every month and adjudicate stuff on site. So in our city, at least right now, we do have an avenue, even if you get a violation of this, to have it dealt with so you don't fall deeper and deeper into either financial problems, which keep you from getting stabilized, or actually get incarcerated for this longer term. So in our city, in our current justice court, we have an avenue where you can violate and still find a way out without getting deeper into problems. That's part of the reason why we're doing it that way. I don't think fines do anything in these situations at all. Thing that might help is to get in front of the judge, and the judge has some ability to have options available and move them to the right avenue instead of just incarcerate or fine them. Doesn't help that way. So that's the thing we have going for us right now in this. It could still be circular. There may not be an option about where you're gonna live, but we're not hopefully putting you deeper into debt or make it harder to find housing at the end of this when it's available.
Of course, the downside of that discretion, and you've heard me mention this before, but anyhow, is that in Fair Park, we had a family, not wealthy at all, very modest house, rented, all of that. And 5 times within 2 weeks, a man who was unsheltered living nearby burglarized their garage and they had it on video, was arrested each time. The judge just let them out. They came back and did it again and again and again and again and again. Part of that was bad information for the judges. The judge didn't necessarily know that this person that this was, such an extreme offense. This family is permanently traumatized. I mean, they are, anyhow, and obviously they moved away as quickly as they could, but that's the downside of discretion. We see a lot of that kind of thing where, that you talked about it before, where the police officer takes the stuff in and before it's even registered into evidence, the person is back out on the street. Does this help with that at all? Or
Well,
the judge, I know judges have discretion. I don't know what
when
we
you're
do.
burglarizing, it's not in this ordinance, that's a separate.
Right, but I'm just saying the discretion is,
So I'll say,
because burglarizing would be even more serious than
Yeah.
this.
that's a different sort of part of the code, right?
Right.
No,
but
I'd
the
say somebody
discretion is what I'm raising.
The discretion depends on, it's officer discretion, it's a judge discretion, it's a prosecutor, it's everybody's discretion, right?
Right.
And we need discretion in the system, otherwise you have unintended
Right.
consequences. What we've tried to do in the last year, at least in the city, is say, there's actually a very small number of people who are doing those kind of things. Meaning they are racking up so many charges over the months that it's very clear that the criminal justice system is not working for them in any way. It's not deterring the activity, it's not getting them better in any way, it's just not working for them. Most folks would sort of stop the behavior if there's another avenue to do something different. So the Connect program for us, I'll say rational folks generally try and find the easiest way to get their needs met. Right? That's generally sort of how we look at things. We started the Project Connect in the city with the public safety plan specifically for that sort of concept. Where somebody is doing that, the criminal justice system has not worked for them or us in that instance. Let's pull them out and do a different intervention with them. So what we've done, we took 2 police social workers from the police department and reassigned them for this past year, full time. We took the 50 individuals who have been arrested or cited the most by Salt Lake City PD in 12 months. I think the top one had it's like 80 some odd warrants in 1 year. And we said, your job as 2 social workers with those 50 people is to figure out how to decrease their interaction with law enforcement. That's your job. Figure it out with them. And so they just dove in. A lot of these folks about half of them were generally in jail at any point in time anyway. And probably a little less than half of them really have said, I'm not really interested in working with you at all. But the other half, they've had a wide variety of stuff. So at least 3 of them had probably permanent brain injuries. And so they kept getting referred to treatment, like cognitive behavioral group treatment, and they'd show up and they'd do it. Wasn't doing anything for them though. So we had to get them in emergency hearing at the state disability office to get disability service. A couple of them needed phones. Like just contact with the social worker and their PO and the LDA and the court just to comply, right? Because they didn't warrant for not complying. We had one guy who just didn't know he was doing this. And they said, do you know you're on our high utilizer list? I think they use that term with him. I said, really? He's like, yeah, you're like top 50. And so he said, oh, I didn't know that. Went on his way. And the next time they saw him, he said, how am I doing? I'm on the list, up or down. Well, have you been arrested? He said, nope, haven't been arrested since that. Well, you're probably dropping down the list. He's like, all right. I'm not saying it's a game, but you don't, if your reality in a day and week and a month is you're just used to getting arrested a lot and cited, that's just sort of how it is. It's like, is it your world? You don't register at all, right? It doesn't register that this is not helping anybody or you or anyone else. That's your sort of way of operating with the world. That's how you interact. And so it's not easy to change that sometimes, but by doing an intervention with that group, you have a huge impact on the rest of the system. So that's one way we're trying to deal with that, because it usually is a small number of people who have those situations. And if we're trying to revamp the entire system for that group, it's really overwhelming. Can't do it well. If we're carving them out and doing a different intervention with the goal of just decreasing their criminal justice activity, why they would be arrested, you can probably make some headway in that. And if we keep doing that piece by piece, we're actually going to find that group has a lot of really unique and difficult situations, and they're going to need a very different intervention than a lot of other folks. And it's going to be more effective long-term as well. So that's the reason we've gone that route. And that's why you heard the legislature talk a lot in their funding this year about, they'll call it a high utilizer group. But this is just identifying people that cannot or won't change behavior. They'll say won't, I'll say cannot, because I think underlying that sort of behavior is a lot of other impairment stuff going on. It could be cognitive, emotional trauma, all of those things, underlying chronic mental health issues. They all look the same sometimes, and you need a different intervention with folks. We've also found that we've been able to get a number of them into the micro shelters on 700 West we partnered with on, because they needed a place to be physically. I can't say this enough. It is so much easier to comply with court orders and treatment recommendations and everything else if you have a place to go and sleep every night. That's been identified. We knew this for a long time. It's being sort of reintroduced by a lot of people that we need more of that. For a small number of people, for a small number of units, you have a huge impact on the shelter system, on housing, on the jail. About a quarter of the people in jail today, depending on the day you're in there, are experiencing homelessness. It's just a reality of the system. We're dealing with homelessness and all these other systems not very effectively. If we could do it a little differently, we'd probably save a lot of money and time that way. So that's a big sort of tangent on this whole ordinance. But the point of the ordinance is you have to have some community standards to live up to for all of us. So we all sort of get along and have a mutual understanding of what we're going to do here. And we've got to do everything in our power to help people live up to that. Whether it's the Project Connect or a safe parking place or shelter or how, whatever it is, we got to keep doing that piece too with it.
Nate Monster's on this call if you want to.
Yeah, we saw Nate's presentation.
You want to pull up the super high utilizer data and that kind of thing. It's
sure.
pretty.
I'm happy to walk out, Nate, if you want to take over.
Thanks for having me. Were you wanting me to do that whole presentation for the high utilizers?
I don't know if we have the stamina to get through that presentation as well.
Okay.
But it's a very good presentation, Nate.
It is,
I've seen it and but it's just, even if you wanted to throw up your one like 51 million slide just to complement what Andrew's told us, you could do such a thing, or we could save it.
Well, let me jump in a little bit to kind of talk about the state and kind of the work that we're trying to do to support local entities. So in Salt Lake City, there is the St. Vincent de Paul, and they currently work with Salt Lake Police Department. If there is individuals that are camping, they are allowed to offer them space. If that individual will accept a bed, they will save a space for them that night, as long as they're there prior to 7 o'clock. So that's when folks start lining up. We're currently finding ways we would like to see that extend and be a year-round thing. And that's something that we're kind of having as a goal to support the city. So if there is an ordinance change, that way there would be some backing to make sure that there's some extra flex during the nighttime for those that are in need during those moments for camping and things like that. We're also working on West Valley City being a permanent year-round thing. We're working on Ville 1990 as well, being funded to keep those beds around. And there's some extra things that we're also working on to kind of bump up the numbers where we can. So we're trying to do what we can as a state to say we want to support local entities and what their approach is on how they work in this kind of field, and do everything we can to try and increase bed counts, because there is still a need. You'll see in the next coming weeks, there's going to be the point in time count. The results will be coming out, talking about the individuals experiencing homelessness across the state. One little key feature that I will bring up is there has been an increase in individuals over the age of 65. So when we talk to the rural Utah, different cities throughout the state, they're starting to notice there are elderly individuals that are kind of getting outpriced on their rent. And we're partnering. We have a grant coming up for Iron County where we'll be putting a micro shelter down there to try and kind of work with that piece. So it's kind of a statewide issue, and this ordinance, we're trying to do what we can as a state to support as best we can, but we're still going to do everything we can to increase count. As far as the high utilizers, so looking at Project Connect, a key point, I don't think that Andrew said it, but there were 8 folks in that Project Connect that once they were connected to services, since then they have had 0 police interaction. So for some individuals, one approach works. For high utilizers, those folks have been experiencing homelessness, if they are homeless, for a longer period of time than the typical individual. And they may not have been offered, or they may not be in that right space to where they're ready to take that hand and get that off-road to kind of get out and back stabilized. So the state this year, as you saw, or as you've heard with legislation, we're being asked to be compassionate in the sense of trying to look at the systems across the board and find ways where are there small areas that are working and should be supported more and could be grown, and trying to identify the different areas that are needed for the smaller subsets within the population of those experiencing homelessness to try and really kind of grow the need for each individual as an individual. So that's kind of the approach from the state in a quick summary.
Those sound like complementary approaches. Andrew, I apologize. I thought we were going to be peppering you with questions, like a whole bunch of them. I was prepared to really feel some aggressive remark, but everybody got it out of their system on Tuesday night.
Okay.
I have one more question.
Okay.
We still have opening.
Want me to
For a question.
Answer a question?
Yeah,
Okay.
so, at EMS, a lot of what we see, and Amy and I just had this experience in Ballpark not very long ago, where people don't want to use services because it's expensive, like they don't want to take an ambulance ride.
Gosh, that's so heartbreaking.
Yeah. So I'm driving from the university to pick up this woman to take her back up there. So we also see a lot of folks that utilize services because they're lonely, essentially service providers become their social network. And I mean, I feel like I'm seeing this more and more and more all the time where, it's easy to call to get some attention. So again, I know everything costs money, right? But it seems like something we talk about a lot is homelessness services. But are we starting to think about institutions that are providing more just we'll go out and befriend somebody for a little while and leave? Is this something that's coming online at all?
I can't point to any particular program that would meet that. I have an impression about how things are going. I'll put it that way,
Okay.
okay? I think as budgets get tighter and tighter, we see that social services oftentimes get shrunk.
Mhm.
I think we've seen some of that with senior centers.
Mhm.
I think we've seen some of that with just senior housing in general too, and just affordable housing as well. Um, I think we've relied for a long, long time on just private sort of organizations and groups. I mean, this is where churches were very prominent for many, many decades in this valley and even now in some places. And social groups and civic organizations and senior centers and all of that provided a lot of this. And even sort of housing developments where you were together. And it provided that sense of community in a lot of ways. I fear that in general, it feels a little bit like we're losing some of that. Now, we do see what you're talking about with, say, our police social workers a lot, where somebody's in crisis, legitimate crisis of some sort, and the police will get involved and social work gets involved and they build a rapport with them to help through that crisis. And then there becomes a relationship and the police start spending a lot of time just sort of managing that person. So they're not calling 911.
Mhm.
Now that's a lot to do with psychological issues and emotional issues. And I think it's sometimes really hard to figure out how do you find sort of your people, your community, where you're going to be, where you feel like you get that support outside of the police social worker. That's what they're really trying to do a lot of there. There's just not a lot of great answers. And I think it might be an interesting discussion with the police social work folks, or maybe the county aging services or youth services, whatever it is, to talk through what are the other safety nets for sort of social interaction and inclusion and belonging. But I think we talk sort of generally about it. I think we're all getting more isolated from one another and there's less social cohesion and all these kind of things. And it feels sometimes like it's an esoteric discussion, like in general, is this crisis of sort of belonging. But you're right, there's actually tangible places where it is really happening and it's hitting emergency services. And when it hurts emergency services, that's when the city tries to get involved in that way. Because that's sort of our lane. Well, we don't run senior services, we don't run housing ourselves necessarily, we don't do those kind of programs. So we generally feel it when it hits our 911 call centers, so.
And it seems like a good spot in my, for more of these public-private sort of. I mean, it's hard for me to really get my mind around when public-private interactions could work, but it seems like this might be a good.
So I can answer your question, but it's not me. I'm just reading aloud messages from Sarah Nielsen, who's listening to this meeting, but can't unmute because bedtime duties. She says that there's a social service program called Miracle Messages. That's a nonprofit that creates friendships for the unhoused. It's a nonprofit out of San Francisco, but there are chapters everywhere. And that is the thing that would address your specific question.
Thank you.
And I think if you're talking about the unhoused or folks without homes, I think great programs have a sense of community to them. I think the other side, a village always talks about their community piece. That's what they're really, housing, that's a community piece.
Seems true for the micro shelter
But you'll see the
community
micro
too.
shelters, you'll see places that really do well, has that sense of belonging, like I'm a part of a group that understands me, I understand them. I need to be here, they need me here. Places that probably aren't less effective don't have that piece to them. And I can't tell you how to make that magic, but I think you know when you see it. And I'd love to see a lot of that happening in your permanent supportive housing projects where you have a 5-story building with 100 units in it. And if it's run really well, hopefully you create some sense of that in there as well. Where you are getting a lot of support internally there. It's not sort of isolate you from the community, but as you're interacting with the community, and it's hard for you to interact with the community sometimes, it's good to have a place you come back to and feel like I do belong, people understand me here. I think one thing we don't talk a lot about is when you're feeling isolated from society, in homelessness in this case, or mental illness or other things, that alienation doesn't go away quickly or easily, even if you get into a housing unit. You still may feel different, and some of your behaviors you're aware may look different to other people. I used to have examples of this, but there was a guy on the river for a number of years now, and VO and Outreach did work with him for at least 2 to 3 decades. It was a long time. And one day he just said, I'm ready to come in. And they had a place to bring him into an apartment. And he started covering the windows and the door with paper and stuff just to block it. And then neighbors started complaining about yelling and screaming out of the apartment. And so they called the property owner called the outreach team and went and talked to him. They knocked on the door. They heard him screaming when they walked out. They knocked on the door and they stopped and he came and peered at him and let him in. And is everything okay? And they said, "Well, are you okay? You heard the screaming." And he goes, "Yeah, I'm having the episodes again, and I was trying to block it out so nobody heard me." He was acutely aware that he had some mental illness, and that was a major reason why he self-isolated on the river for so long. And when it got so hard out there, he was finally willing to say, "I need to come in." He was still aware that he was gonna not do well in the tight quarters, and he knew that. And it was this really awful dilemma for him. We have people who have come into housing and they literally can't stay in the bed in the unit. There's a place in Colorado that actually built a housing complex around a courtyard, and they allow people to camp in their tents for a while to transition into their apartment. People who get apartments oftentimes will invite their friends in, or friends will ask to come over and they can't say no. And it's not necessarily always a threat thing. It's more of, how can I possibly have this whole apartment myself? And I know my friends don't. You could most of us say no consistently to that. It feels very selfish. So there is a real piece of that you need to sense a community. And when you leave your one community to go to a new one, it's not always easy. You just rebuild that.
I don't.
You have a couple questions, comments behind,
Sure.
and I said I would direct your attention to them.
Okay.
So,
Taylor Stevens reporting. That's a good way to start this. 2 out of 3 jaywalking tickets issued. Go to home, Rio Grande area. Majority higher was being criminalized. Camping parades, recently we had to go country for camping. Stayed. Yeah, I think this hits the dilemma, right? There are times when, as a city, we say, well, it's okay to be outside on the street for a parade, for instance, right, or an event. But we don't want to see it every day, every place. Or maybe people are saying, well, they're not as dirty or as cleaner when they do it versus these other folks do it. We've even seen this in general camping. We've had groups of people who have camped together in years past, and they have a set of rules for their group. It's clean, it's organized, you don't have visitors in, those kind of things, and they set up their own little community there. And we said, well, they're not really causing much of a problem on a vacant piece of property that's not attracting nuisance issues and health issues, right? And it's true sometimes, but it's also true times when they set that up and then people who can't stay with them, but see that no one's bothering them, go a little outside of their perimeter and a little outside their perimeter, and you get a larger congregating of people. And that generally has led to other issues coming in that weren't necessarily what the original group wanted either. So it's a dilemma for us about how do you judge when something's going to become a problem or is a problem, will become a problem in a week or a year. If we allow a small group who's doing a good job together there, how do you ensure that nobody else is going to sort of cause problems nearby? This is the hard thing with the city ordinance of, does it apply to everybody, to certain people, certain times and places? In the current proposal, we said it does carve out the parade route as one of those exemptions. And I don't know how that's gonna go with the city council. I think there would probably be a lot of pushback if that wasn't in there. But it does create a dilemma about, that's okay, or it's okay for anybody to camp during that parade route that night, even if you're unsheltered or sheltered. It is tricky that way, admittedly. Let's see, I live close to this church parking lot. A lot of things happen after hours, bothersome. I mean, new rules, a lot of different spaces. The church parking lot considered.
I think it ends.
Yeah, that's
Private
a church parking lot would be private. So this ordinance deals with public rights of way of property. It doesn't deal with private property. So that would be a different situation if it was a private landowner who allowed that for some period of time. I believe right now, you are not allowed to camp even on private property for more than 14 days, I think it is, with notice. So there is a different sort of rule about private property that's not addressed in this at all. Yeah.
How does the new ordinance impact the Jordan River Parkway? I don't know if that's separate. I don't know if it's city property or state property, but.
I think the Jordan River counts as one of those riparian corridors, which is a word I had to look up.
Yeah, correct. So
Yeah,
the Jordan River would be a riparian corridor, which we identified in the ordinances. You can't camp here. The trail itself, depending on where you are on the trail, is city property. At times, the land itself is not ours, but we have an easement to get through it. So we can enforce on the trail ourselves, and we do. That's where we have rangers and police officers on the trail. Yeah, and generally in our work with the county and the state who actually have land rights, the water rights and then the land under the river, for instance, or on the banks. They've always been working with us very closely about that too. So generally every week on a Thursday, there's a meeting that involves city, state, county, and then private partners on all the camps everybody knows about. And they sort of sort through where it is, who owns jurisdictional rights to that and who's going to handle it. So. Are there any questions I missed? Sir?
just comment.
Yeah.
I'm grateful, Andrew, that you differentiated between this ordinance and policy. Because one of the things that I talked about in my minute and a half at the meeting on Tuesday night was just, our neighborhood had some pretty bad experiences in 2020 with camps in park strips, specifically in sensitive locations near schools that were just allowed to expand for 6 months at a time before the health department or the police were compelled to come in and clean it up. And that was it was kind of scary having it there, and some bad behavior happened around it. And I didn't have a child at the Challenger school, but I felt bad for them.
A question that did come up, which I may be helpful for you as well, I don't know, is there was a question about, well, what if you just had a provision in there that said it's illegal to camp unless there's no other option, like there's no shelter beds available. So it's right. We haven't had that in our current ordinance. However, we did have a police policy for a while, particularly in the wintertime, but year round, where an officer who came across a camping situation did have to check on shelter availability, which wasn't very easy to do actually at the time, and still is sort of iffy real time.
Yeah.
And if there was, and if it was the right type for the right person, so if it's a female, and there was a bed available to a female that was available at that time, then you could enforce. But if you didn't, then you sort of couldn't. That's hard. I'll say it's hard in a number of ways. Number one, it's hard because our shelter beds are not necessarily just electronic where one opens up and it's free at that exact time. People in the shelters can come and go to jobs, come back, can leave for other things and come back. So they have to check it at certain times to make sure somebody's in that bed for that night or that day. And they can leave during the day till they have business to take care of. It's a good thing to do. We also had a problem for a number of years now, at least 2.5 now, where we've been at functional capacity in the actual shelters. So we were running at, say, 97% capacity, which is full functionally. And so there was never shelter availability officially. So that means you really couldn't ever enforce the no camping policy, which is where the trouble comes in your example of can't really enforce this policy anymore. So it's a bind for us of saying, we don't really want to just criminalize a state of being if there's not a resource there. But if there's not the resource there, it really doesn't help to have an ordinance on the books that we can't enforce. So we haven't put it in here as a provision as far as making sure there's availability of shelter beds. I don't know if the city council would want to look at that again or not. It's a good question for them. But it did make it difficult to enforce the ordinance. We had that in there. From a policy perspective, again, from the police department, they could still have a policy similar to that if they chose to do, or we thought it was the right time of year. There may be times of the year where it makes more sense, particularly in bad weather or other places like that. I just don't know how that's going to play out. But as far as the ordinance itself, it does make it hard to have an ordinance you can't enforce it if there's never a resource that allows you to enforce it. So that was a question for anybody.
So, when we have the North Temple group that meets every Friday at 4, and there's a pocket right on South Temple, Folsom Trail, 8th West, that that continues to create problems, and for months, we haven't been able to do anything about it. Would this ordinance give us tools to help us actually do something about that problematic area?
Since I know who you're talking about in the area, we can probably address it directly. This is about camping. So it identifies that there are activities that would show a camping activity. So
Right,
personal hygiene, cooking, sleeping, shelter, those kind of things. The folks you're talking about don't do those things in that area necessarily.
and
They're doing a lot of drugs, they're hanging out, it's a loitering issue perhaps, but there's no loitering ordinance. So this ordinance would probably not address that. And that's the other thing I probably should have clarified is that if we're talking about general, what people refer to as nuisance issues in the city, that behaviors that are irritating or problematic, or they seem to be affiliated with crime, but not maybe directly from an officer perspective or evidential, this will not necessarily address that. Now, it does say if there's evidence that other crimes are being permitted in a camp or a situation where there's people there, then the police would be able to do something about that. But those folks aren't showing any signs of camping per se.
But they're getting drugs from somewhere, or they couldn't be selling them.
Now, that should be dealt with in another sort of realm, but
Right,
not necessarily in this ordinance.
but I wondered if they were hanging out in a way that fit within this, because,
It's
anyhow,
tricky because we don't have there's no.
they go on the private property and then the police come and then they move off the private property onto public property.
Yeah. The loitering, there's no law against loitering, and in fact, one of the things we try to be very clear about is some public spaces need to be public. We need to have parks available to everybody. We have standards of conduct in the park, but we can't just go and say that I don't like the look of that group, they shouldn't be here. There's a tension there that we have to hold sometimes.
Yeah,
And it's a tension we have sometimes in park strips or other places like you're talking about. Now, open drug dealing or drug using or nuisance behaviors like you're talking about should be dealt with in the code, but not in a camping situation necessarily. So this would not address some of those behaviors you see in different city parks and things.
so as part of the 600 North reconstruction, the city is gifting me 400 additional feet of parking strip, which makes me really, really nervous.
Oh,
Will I be able to control that under this? And people would just be able to come and hang out there all the time? I have to maintain it.
not knowing the parking strip itself, but in our proposal, a park strip would be a public right of way. So that people could not just obstruct it. Sit there, hang out, constantly have a lot of stuff there. That would be a violation of the proposal. But again, like everything else, there could be situational stuff about your street, about the strip itself, about the sidewalk that could sort of change it a bit. So, but yeah, that's the intent of clarifying this. So park strips will be identified as similar to the sidewalks and the street. So you couldn't just be in that little strip and sort of hang out that way.
Jeff, you're gonna have to flip your strip.
Oh, absolutely. Right now it's just weeds because they just created this and nobody's maintaining it. I reached out to them and asked who's supposed to maintain it. While it's just rocks and weeds, and they said they are, but they haven't gotten around to it yet.
City's giving that to you or the state?
The city. Yeah,
Okay. So I assume yes, it would apply to some extent. Yeah, there could be nuances there.
You mentioned the city and the state, with what Salt Lake is attempting. And with what the state has been gifting us over the last couple of years, do you need voters' support with anything legislative?
Well, I know Nate Meiser's on here. He'd probably be able to answer that from the state legislative perspective.
You probably wouldn't speak to it a little bit.
I
from
would
the city
say,
perspective.
Nate, you can, I'll be careful here, Nate. I would say that the Office of Homeless Services did get actually a large amount of money this year in different pockets. Right? And they have some flexibility in what they're gonna do with that money. And I would assume, Nate, that there's gonna be a lot of desire to show some really good outcomes pretty quickly this year. And if that goes well, that's the biggest selling point to legislators about, let's keep doing this funding for things that seem to work well. So for the time being, I think executing on the current plans pretty well. And then also, as we get closer into next year, advocating as we get more clarity on what the gaps still are. I think that's a big piece of what I'd say. So right now, I'm not sure there's anything specific. I think there's still a lot of discussion, I'm guessing, between the federal government and the state and us as well about different policies through housing and urban development and other things like that that we're still working through. But as far as right now, I'm not aware of anything, Nate.
Can you re-ask the question? I didn't hear all of the question when you first asked it.
And the question is, are there things that the public could sort of support us on through voting or advocacy perhaps?
Yeah, well, just real fast talking that budget. So on the 19th of this month, the Office of Homeless Services will be going to the Executive Appropriation Committee, where we'll be talking about what pieces we've already said that we want to work on with some of that funding. And our funding pools are in different pillars. So we're kind of directed in how to utilize that piece. So at that time, we'll be able to talk more about the plans that we're working on. So I would say keep your eyes open. As far as advocating, I would say right now is a chance to have a conversation. We're looking for ideas. We're looking to try and assess and see what's working, what could be added in, because we're really trying to paint the picture of every person that's experiencing homelessness is experiencing it in a unique way, and that some of them might need one thing where some might need something else. And it's not just one or two or three different answers. So we're trying to really identify pieces that might work for each individual, because right now there's a lot of set paths and there's a lot of outcomes and potential repercussions that can slow some people down. And so we're trying to find good off ramps for people that still can be compassionate and hold accountability, but also trying to clear up some of that, those individuals that could be helped in a different way and open up space for others. So how you can help us is think of ideas, reach out to us. We're totally open right now to listen and to hear each and every idea. Right now is truly the time to talk.
I just have to say, 12-year-old me is so psyched. I've never felt so much like I'm in an episode of Star Trek before with the screens and everything like that. It's so fun. Sorry. So, sorry. But yeah, did you know I'm a big nerd? Yeah, big secret. I never know that about me. Anyway.
The only other thing I'll say that is maybe not critical to this discussion is we have far more police officers on duty in the daytime than we do at night. And so when we talk about nighttime issues, overnight particularly, there's just not the same volume of people to enforce stuff at night that there would be during the daytime either. And I'm not sort of justifying not enforcing overnight, but the reality is we also do what we can when we have the right resource and when the need is there. The need generally is during the day for the police to be out in the larger numbers for a lot of reasons. So overnight issues, sometimes you just don't get a lot of that interaction. And there's not none, there is some. But it's also just the rhythm of how sort of civic life plays out sometimes. So I think that's also a factor in looking at how it's actually enforced and what it's gonna look like on the ground. I just don't see us having a ton more police officers out in the nighttime hours looking for stuff like this. They're generally handling the crises that happen. So, for what it's worth, I think that's also a piece of what we talk about, the ordinance versus how you enforce it and what the availability of resources is. Yeah.
I'm gonna say thank you for your time, unless there are any more pressing burning questions. Wait, oh, I was like, do you have, yeah, Fair Park is, I gotta be honest, like, our friends in Fair Park have a lot more issues than we do at the moment, and I am grateful and sympathetic, but I think one of the things that came up, and again in this conversation, is that resources might change and conditions might not be as great as they are right now for us. And so we need to think about some of these possibilities.
And even for us, I mean, the city has really stepped up and done really dramatic things. It is changing. so dramatically, not enough yet to recover the parks and get the spaces on North Temple activated by businesses and things, but so dramatically better. You know, I talked about this family, used to have 50 to 100 people hanging out on their parking strip and the median across the street. And they'd have to call the police at least once a day with some serious incident, and every morning they have to go out and clean up. And now it's just one or two. And I told Chief Red that, and he said one or two is too many. And it is. I mean, it's really a problem for them. Everybody regards a parking strip as part of their, you know, this is my yard. And to not have control of that. And so that part of it would be really great for many of the families in Fair Park, be able to control their parking strip and a little bit more.
So right now, and maybe Councilmember Carlson can correct me, but I think the council took public comment on Tuesday. I think they tentatively scheduled this for a vote on May 19th.
That's correct. It's in the staff report.
So that may or may not happen. I think they've also requested a lot of discussion between now and then, so it could go to a vote on that night. It could be extended. I'm just not sure what it's going to look like, particularly in the other budget sessions. So I really probably not.
She did agree with you.
Yeah, so I'm not in a place to tell you when they might look at it because there's a lot of factors for them, but that's the current time frame they're looking at.
Jeff, also just extending that same old thing that we offer all the time. It's hard for East Side, families who really see that it's just it affects the West Side a lot more. We're always looking for ideas on way to collaborate, way to make people more aware, educate folks on opportunities. And when the hot spots start to come up, we get away from that work. But I just think that if we still continue to grind that work, like how do we collaborate? How do we make sure that, East Side folks are okay with resources being diverted to hotspots? I think we need to continue to have those conversations.
Thank you for that invitation. We'll try and figure out what to do, because it's so much better, but it's still an issue. Just last week, a friend of mine rides to work along the Jordan River Trail, or was, but there was a group 200 south on the Jordan River that harassed him in such a way that now he's going to ride over to 9th, go up 9th, and come back, and it's a half a mile east of his route, but he does not want to go through that again. And that was just something that happened last week. So it's still an issue, but the city's been pretty amazing at stepping up, supporting this. Every other Friday at 4, we have a meeting with police and representatives of various city agencies are involved. Andrew usually comes to talk about how to deal with the particular things that are still issues, and we really appreciate that support. That's pretty remarkable.
I think that's the hardest working group right there. That's
Yeah.
a good meeting. But Andrew, just on that note, I keep saying this every time I go to the North Temple group that, tell us what you need, is there anything we can do? And it never really comes up because we just really don't know how to do it. So, since you're the man behind all of this coordination, just keep that in the back of your head. If there's opportunities for folks that don't carry the load to participate,
Sure.
let us know. We can help. Maybe.
Grant, you seem full of energy. Do you want to work some of it out? I see handing out.
Let's do some jumping jacks.
Here, I know, I saw you sent me some slides. Let me pull them up.
Well, Josh has got,
I know,
the
Josh has
update.
got the city budget too, so that's a small issue, right?
I can be super quick. I know, I promised a small update and I can be very quick about it.
And I am sorry, we talked about you coming to this meeting
I have
all before this. got scheduled.
worries. I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Grant Miller. I'm the state representative for this area. All of Ballpark, my district, it's our district, House District 24 goes from I-80 all the way to 4 South. And so I just wanted to come in and give a quick legislative update. And Amy's going to pull it up and throw it on here. A couple of things, I'll go through it as quickly as I can because we still need a city budget, and I know they're going through some interesting stuff right now regarding tax proposals. And so I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to hit some things that are particularly community centric. Another thing I also want to hit is that community councils are nonpartisan inherently, but the legislature is very partisan. And so as I talk about some things, the update, understand that I appreciate and encourage viewpoint diversity, and understand that just because I think something's cool or not cool, it might be very different from what you have, and I don't want to try to impinge on anyone's political beliefs here. But anyway, this is me. And if you hit the presentation button, it'll actually dance around and animate. It's kind of fun. I did it at Canva.
Well,
Let's see, is it gonna do the thing?
Sorry,
Okay, cooperate.
my screen might be even more crowded than
It's okay.
than I'm letting on here.
The substance is more important than the animation, but I want to show it off, you might as well.
That's not full screen.
There we go. Oh, well, that's really big.
That's I was showing a portion of the screen.
Okay, can we zoom it out just a little bit?
Wheels.
Is it possible?
It's
We might be stuck. You might be able to see a quarter of it.
stop sharing and share the whole thing. Share what?
The mustache is too big for the bandwidth.
Yeah, I suppose.
That's hilarious. Right.
This is building anticipation. This is going to be the best legislative update you've ever heard. I'll talk it up while it pops up. And one thing I'll kind of point out while it comes up, we'll hit some community centric stuff first, because the legislature talks a lot about local control, and how they want all communities and municipalities to have their own local control, unless it's Salt Lake City, in which case they want to dictate everything we do and control everything we do. And so I do want to hit a couple of things that revolve around that area. Hit a couple of bills that we were able to successfully pass, some good news, as well as kind of finish with the best news, which is bills that were proposed that were awful and failed. So Amy, if you could kind of click through, there's a couple of animations you can watch how zippy zappy this gets. It's kind of fun. Go ahead and click. Yeah, advance it. There we go. Woohoo! Hit it again. So look at this legislative update. Hit it again. How exciting is this stuff?
Is
All
that
right.
an advertisement for Canva?
That's no, I don't. Who said I was using Canva? This is totally PowerPoint. PowerPoint could totally do this. Say it one more time. Okay, I want to start real quick. HB 242. This is a infrastructure bill. They ran it 2 years ago, and unfortunately tried to bring it back again. This was a bill where the state tried to dictate what we could do with our roads. Tried to impede bike lanes, byways, pedestrian byways. And originally they wanted to control all of our neighborhood byways and community roads. There was a compromise that was ultimately met that wasn't great, but was better than what was proposed. Small community roads, Salt Lake still was able to govern and control, but larger thoroughfares like 4th South and 3rd West will require UDOT approval before those can be modified. And that was probably one of the bigger community impact bills, I would say, when considering like Ballpark and other community councils around here when it comes to infrastructure. Amy, if you could advance the slide, you might have some questions. I'm going to go through these as quick as I can because I know like we're running out of time. But write down your questions and then ask me real quick at the end. For those of you that have kiddos, there's a 12K cell phone ban, bell-to-bell ban. So that way your kids can't use the cell phones while in class. That passed was signed by the governor. And Amy, if you could hit the thing again. All these bills, by the way, went into effect yesterday. Yesterday was the day that these took the power of law. Real quick, I want to talk about taxes. The state was very keen on wanting to cut taxes in very different areas, but to different levels of success. For example, they cut the gas tax by about 6 cents a gallon. And this was well before gas shot up to the $17 a gallon that it is now. So the good news is that went into effect yesterday. So we have like some relief at the pump, but it doesn't really make a dent to the kind of damage that we've otherwise seen. Income tax cut of 0.05%. The state really wanted to be able to say, the legislature wanted to be able to say that they cut taxes for 6 years in a row. And so they kind of just forced this tax cut. Costed the state about $130 million and it caused significant expenditure cuts to our social programming, which, we just heard a presentation from Mr. Johnston. Like, this money kind of is necessary downstream, but it kind of cut into flesh and went back to people in the form of tax cut. The average person will probably see about between $35 to $55 back in taxes because of this tax cut. All money back is ultimately a good thing, but it came at a great expense of a larger pot of that money going to very meaningful expenditures. But that was the legislature's prerogative. And there was a slight tax hike on the sin tax. Tobacco and adult materials, that's going to be a little bit more expensive moving forward. So if you appreciate those things, just know that they're going to be a little bit more expensive. You can advance the slide. I want to talk real quick about some victories, because when I was running for office, a lot of people said a Democrat couldn't accomplish anything in a supermajority, and I want to prove that's wrong. It's wrong because you can get things done. I passed 3 bills into law this year. HB 53 was a really cool bill. There's this program that helps people, adults with disabilities, get into the workforce, and the state of Utah reserves job openings for people who qualify. That program was going to die. And so I picked it up and was able to get approval for funding and continuance of the program for another 10 years with some report back requirements. And so this allows people with disabilities to work through community rehabilitation organizations to get into the state workforce. HB 94, court fine reform, and Mr. Johnston was talking about when you're dealing with like homeless or indigent people that have court fines, it kind of seems redundant or not very productive. And I'm a public defender in real life. I had a lot of clients that had fines, and they were also required to go through treatment. In my mind, like, the treatment and the stabilization is more important than the court fine. They would ask me, what's more important, the court fine or the treatment? And under the eyes of law, they have to somehow figure out both, even if they don't have the money for both. So what this law does is if you go and do the treatment, you focus on the stabilization, you keep your receipts, you'll get dollar for dollar credit against your court fine. This bill, I passed my first session, and the problem is the judges weren't enforcing it. And so I went back and revisited that law and said, no, we're serious, and sent a serious message to the judiciary that they need to start helping people out and focusing on stabilization as opposed to revenue. And then this last bill, SB 283, did a lot of technical reforms to court access. Like, for example, people who wanted protective orders were getting unnecessarily surcharged by the court, making it more expensive and inaccessible. We did away with that, as well as a few other barriers. Go ahead and advance the slide. Like I said, I'm going to go as fast as I can. I'll even talk as fast as an auctioneer. I made this slide deck right after legislative session. I was really proud about the work that we did towards the Great Salt Lake and water preservation. And the problem is, like, you take one step forward and then you get in the car and drive like a mile backwards. And so I've been very discouraged about the news that they're opening a hyperscale data center. If that's something you guys want to talk about, we'll reserve it for the end. But be aware that I don't have my head underground. I know what's going on. But, for what it's worth, I still want to highlight the fact that we did take some action regarding the lake water levels and water preservation. The legislature did revamp a lot of conservation plans, water releasing, water rights, trying to make sure that when people forfeited their water rights or wanted to commit their water rights to the Great Salt Lake, that water physically went there, because previously that wasn't happening. You forfeit water rights and just go downstream. And we were able to fix that. Data center reporting, for what it's worth, from here on out, all water usage from data centers has to be publicly transparent. Credit to the folks on the other side of the aisle. If you haven't figured it out, I'm a Democrat and work with a lot of Republicans. But Republicans actually passed this bill, and a lot of these other bills came from Republican sponsors. And so I'm hoping that some of them are starting to really kind of understand the dire situation of our high elevation desert, our water shortage, and our drought. So we made some progress, but like I said, clearly in revelation of a lot of decisions that have been made since legislative session, we've got a lot more work to do. Amy, if you could advance the slide, I want to talk about kind of some flops. That were the biggest news of legislative session is like all the bad news that didn't actually happen. And Amy, if you could hit that button again, there's a big old stamp that just says failed. That's going to just pop up. Boom. Oh wait, go back. I want to do it again. Just wait. Do it. Like, you got
It just happens fast.
No, you have to click it. There it goes. No, just that, because that advances the slide. I think you just got to click on the.
Oh, I click on the
Yeah.
slide itself? Okay.
See, this is, boom, there it is. That's what I wanted. I wanted the action shot there. No, there was some guy up north. I forget his name, and if I remember his name, won't say it. He wanted to rename Harvey Milk Boulevard, and he wanted to rename it to Charlie Kirk Boulevard, and it was all political posturing. And it made a lot of noise. There was a lot of headlines, and I want to give credit to Salt Lake City, Mayor Mendenhall, Quality Utah. There were a lot of people that came out to make sure that our cultural byways were protected. And the good news about this is this went nowhere. This didn't even make it out of Rules Committee. It had no public hearing. It wasn't given the light of day. And so, it was really kind of made in bad nature. It was in bad faith to those who respect the memory of Harvey Milk. And it's even in bad faith to those who follow Charlie Kirk. It didn't make any sense at all. And the good news is that it didn't see the light of day, and it was not successful. If we could advance the slide real quick, because we're almost through this. Like I said, I'm going to zip through this. The flag ban, go ahead and click the other thing because I want the whole stand that says failed on it. Boom, isn't that exciting? Oh, wait, no, we went back. We went back. It's not
How
working.
is that possible?
But if it's over here, you got it. Yeah, the arrow has to point this way. And you just click and
Okay,
go,
I'm
you
very
advance that way.
impressed with these like invisible
And then you
areas.
go, well, this way. Boom, one more. There you go. And now you click.
Oh.
That's what I want. Flag wars appear to be done, and credit to Salt Lake City, you guys. Salt Lake City went out on this. They wanted to change the laws so that way, if you had a city flag, the state would get handed approving it, and you'd have to have the state review your flag, and they could deny your flag, and that proposal failed. So we got to keep all of our special cultural and ceremonial flags. And the state is no longer going to try to intervene. And so I'm really glad we're gonna deal with flags anymore. If we could advance one more. And click one more time, hit that failed thing. Boom, the vote by mail restrictions. They wanted to make it harder to vote by mail. They wanted, Representative Burton wanted county clerks to have employees posted up to check your driver's license when you pass in your mail ballot. And it would cause really, really difficult access problems to people who lived in rural areas. And locally too, it would be impracticable, very expensive. And the fact of the matter is vote by mail is very popular. It's very accessible and everyone likes it. And the good news, the legislature agreed that they weren't going to change it. We're going to keep our vote by mail the way it is. Let's go to the next slide real quick. This is a really nasty bill. This bill was the same fella from up north. He wanted to ban all food assistance and public assistance to those who couldn't prove that they were U.S. citizens or had permanent legal residency. That applied to food help. That applied to shelter help. That applied to children who wanted reduced or free lunches. So it's a really nasty piece of legislation. But Amy, if you could do me the favor, put the stamp down. This failed. And what was really kind of special is like not only did other members on the other side of the aisle really kind of step up and do the dignified thing and put this bill into purgatory. But they also kind of doubled down, and I had a request for $300,000 for food assistance for vulnerable families. No, it wasn't even $300,000. It was $100,000 that I requested. And they approved it threefold for the next 3 years. And this food assistance is no strings attached. If you come hungry, you get fed. Regardless of whether or not you're a citizen, whether or not you're from the moon, no one cares. Because if you care about humanity, you care about community, you make sure that people are taken care of. And so I'm glad that this failed and we were able to accomplish things that happened in spite of this proposed bill. And the last thing I want to hit real quick, same fella from up north wanted to undo the Utah Compromise. Utah Compromise was a law from about 10 years ago ish. That was really the championed by Equality Utah that allowed for a lot of equity in our laws for our LGBTQ community. And this was targeted to undo that. Things like gender marker changes they wanted to undo. And most nefarious about it was that like it would allow insulting license plates to be derogatory towards the trans community, and it would permit that. And it was just bad faith entirely through the entire set of bills here, and they failed. A part of HB 183 got through, but the substantive stuff that deliberately attacked and inhibited the trans community failed. And so if you could hit that, go with the satisfaction, that stamp, boom. So anyway, that's my update. I hopefully have left Josh enough time to give his update, and I appreciate you kind of like shoehorning me into this meeting today because I know you guys have covered a lot. Real quick, I'll see if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'll stick around if anyone wants to just chat about or complain. I will take your complaints about the Utah State Legislature. I'm sorry, I'm a member up there. Those other people don't represent me. Cheers. And with that, I'll pass the torch. Thanks, guys.
It's your food related.
What's that?
It's your food bill or food assistance bill related to Clancy's school lunch bill.
No, it was different, but he got that one done too. So
Oh, good.
the good news is the legislature felt like feeding people this year, which is a good thing.
That's fine. I think I have a question. We'll probably get through this somewhat fast. Is it okay if I join the meeting real quick?
You sure? Should.
Here we go.
Good. Should.
Yeah. And once I'm in, I'll just put my share on.
You got it. Going. Make co-host, so sharing is easy. Okay. But put your vote, don't unmute.
Right.
You got it.
Okay.
You will create the terrible loop of sound.
Okay, well, we'll go through this pretty quickly. But just to keep in mind, the mayor presented her budget this week on Tuesday at the city council meeting. I know some people in this room were there. And so some of what I'm going to show on here is what was shared at the council meeting that night. And then also keeping in mind that we're at the beginning of the budget process here. So there might be questions, there might be things you're concerned about, and certainly a lot of changes that will affect everyone in the city. But there's still public hearings to come from the city council, a lot of opportunities to engage with the city. I want to recognize Jason Brown, who's Deputy Director from Public Utilities here. It was nice to take his time out of his schedule to come over to tonight and just to be on hand while we share this information for y'all real quick here. So the mayor presented a budget that is a 1.57% increase over the last fiscal year. And that rate is about half of what the inflation rate is. And so in order to get to that, the mayor has asked, just to get on the point of inflation, this is just an example of how the costs of running the city have increased over the last 6 years. Since 2020, a number of these things going up quite substantially, 23% increase in full set of firefighter gear, 45% increase for asphalt, and a doubling on the replacement of intersection traffic lights. And so that has definitely had a big toll at the city in terms of operating costs. The mayor has asked and has been asking departments to create efficiencies and to cut their operational budgets wherever possible. Over the last year, the city has saved $6 million in vacancy savings, meaning when a position comes open at the city, they're held open a little longer to be able to save money. And so that has already been saving money for the city and will continue to in the next year. And so in this budget, there is a total of $13.2 million that's a reduced in operational budgets across the departments. There's some examples of some other efficiencies. Our Salt Lake City Police Department no longer has to pay as much overtime paid via thanks to Chief Red and our full staffing of the department. Across the city, we've been looking at service contracts and consolidating those and doing more things in-house where needed or where possible. Our urban services and our Clean City team has made a lot of that possible as well. And then eliminating some low use programs. Some of you may have heard of the Hive program, the Hive Pass, that's actually being ended in this budget. It was found to only have about 400 users citywide. It wasn't income tested, so it wasn't necessarily helping those who were most in need income wise. And so there are other programs that the city engages in to help increase transit access, such as giving free transit passes to students in the Salt Lake City School District. And so that's a focus on that, and that's why that program was eliminated. So the property tax increase that you may have heard about amounts to about $9.87 per month on the average home in Salt Lake City, valued at $624,000. And you can see the breakdown of how that property tax increase is being diverted. Capital improvements, of course, top of the list, maintaining our infrastructure, support for our justice corps. We just talked a lot about our courts and the needs there in the system, and so addressing that, fire response, youth and family services, city fleet maintenance, ongoing maintenance of our parks, environment and energy division, and lighting maintenance in public spaces. Rounding that out on what that will pay for. And moving past here, we can address major questions when we get to the end here. So that's just to emphasize, that's the Salt Lake City portion of the property bill, of your property tax bill that's being impacted. Other of your full tax property tax bill, there's other entities that that tax properties there. So this is only affecting the city portion of the property tax bill. So when you see headlines saying it's a 12% increase, that's not a across the board increase in your property tax bill, but just the city portion. Is another comparison of different home values and what that would equate to per month on the property tax bill for the Salt Lake City portion. And I think that speaks for itself. And then we're going to move on to now to the public utilities budget. That as part of the utilities purpose of delivering clean water and delivering safe infrastructure to our residents, they have proposed some changes to our water and sewer rates that will go towards infrastructure, towards those infrastructure improvements and ensuring that residents have clean drinking water and safe drinking water for years to come. And so the scale illustrated here kind of shows an example of a residential high use to a residential minimum use. And this is indoor and outdoor use. This is the average indoor and outdoor use for residential. This will vary depending on size of your property, size of your meter, things like that. It's the next slide here. Public Utilities has a rate, a website where you can learn more about these rate changes, and there's a rate calculator on there. If you have your utility bill, you can put in your meter size, your water usage, your historical water usage, and get an estimate of what what you could expect to see on the bill when utility rate changes take effect. And that would be July 1st. So I believe if it's correct, the August would be the first bill that people would see
The increase.
the increase. And so I also just want to share the water conservation resources. We have a lot of water conservation resources at the city. We're offering free water checks to residents to increase efficiencies in their water use. Also offer public utilities also offers low water use grass seed. And so that's available currently.
Yes,
right?
it is. Yeah. Call Stephanie, schedule a time to come pick it up, pay for it.
Yeah, so Stephanie doing great resources at our city. Also could be a suggestion for a future meeting. We want to talk about water conservation. She's been a great resource for the city. And so we have a lot of more information at the city website on that. There may be a question about waste and recycling and our city lighting and stormwater. Are those going up? And so those ones, you can see the proposed increases there. For waste and recycling, they at some point in past a couple years ago asked residents whether they preferred to have smaller yearly increases or larger one-time increases, and most people said they wanted a smaller yearly increase. And so this increase is part of that plan. And so $3.29 per month for customers with a 96-gallon garbage cart. And then where we are in the timeline, Mayor just presented that budget this week, and there will be public hearings on May 19th and June 2nd at the City Council meetings. And then in the hour preceding both of those meetings, we will have city staff available to answer questions specifically about the budget. We're calling them a budget open house. We'll be sharing more info on those. But if you come early to any of those meetings and want to talk one-on-one with city staff about your concerns about the budget, it will be available. And the council will need to be adopting that by the end of June. And the truth and taxation hearing, which is required as part of state law, will be on August 11th. I want to direct you also to the budget basics page. That has sort of our landing page for everything budget related at the city. Everything about how the budget goes is generally created in the city, what kind of funds we use, and then you can read this proposed budget and learning from on the city council meetings that they're going to be hearing, have public hearings on this. And that is all. Happy to. Relatively quickly, but quite a bit of impact, but I'm happy to take any questions today.
It looks like there was like 13.5 million from inflation and also 13.5 million from like the operations cuts. So is that like 26 extra? You're 27?
So that 26 million is sort of the deficit city's dealing with there. So 13.2 million being saved in efficiencies and those operational cuts, and the rest of that being increased revenue as a result of the property tax change.
So there's 26 million that's still in the hole.
This is meant to fill that hole. So half of it with the efficiency cuts, with the operational cuts, the other half with the property tax.
Okay.
Increase.
Of the 32, so it's
Of the, I think 26 million. Yeah. Any other big questions?
Question, I noticed you mentioned the grass seed. I bought some of that online on the link and I have never heard, I don't know how to get it, or I haven't heard anything else back from
Let's
it.
talk.
Okay.
Yeah, you give me your number, we can get Stephanie in contact.
Okay.
For sure.
Is it like, can we just walk over to your building on West Temple and pick it up there?
No, because we buy it in such bulk, it's in our warehouse we have on the west side of,
Okay.
by Redwood Road, if south.
Got it.
So that's where it's stored, so.
Got it.
You pick it up back home.
And so by the time we come up to next council or next community council meeting here, it still won't be passed. The budget still won't be quite passed yet because the city council will still be in that process. So there's some time here for people to look over the budget and to ask questions. We definitely want to answer as many questions as possible about how the city spends its money, and we want to be as transparent as possible. So if there's any questions, we encourage you to reach out to us, and we'll look to get those answered. Okay.
Who knows? Maybe we'll take Jean on it.
Yes, but I could have gone a very long lot of questions. Thank you. I can go.
I don't have any questions.
Yeah,
other than
if you have any
grass
questions on,
seed. I also want the grass seed. Seems super cool.
yeah, it's awesome.
But all right, thank you all for hanging with us. And thank you all for your patience, and Andrew.
Well, there's no time.
All right, thank you all. Good, yes.